Are you ready to explore the exciting tech world like never before? Welcome to Better You, the podcast where we dissect the latest in business, technology, and startup trends, all with a keen focus on growth. So, buckle up and get ready to stay ahead of the curve. Let's make you a better you.
So, folks, welcome to another episode of Better You. I'm very excited today because I have Rob as our guest speaker, who is one of the experts in enterprise sales. I know Rob for years. We've worked together and hustled on so many deals to generate revenue for startups. And there are some exciting deals that we worked on where we built the new product messaging, we identified new customer profile. We also helped the engineering team to come up with new ideas as we were learning from our customers. And just to give you guys context, I was sitting down in a conference room with my CEO at the very early stage startup, and this guy walks in, and I looked at my CEO. Our CEO told me, "Oh yeah, actually, Rob is our account executive, and he's going to start working with us on more strategic, more enterprise accounts." And as an engineer, as I started working with Rob more and more, Rob became my role model in sales because the way he was presenting, the way he was talking to his customers, and the way he and we collaborated together into so many deals. I know I said a lot about Rob. To just give you context, in this episode, we are going to talk about how Rob started his journey in sales, and then we'll switch over to the complexity of enterprise sales, and then we'll go into the startup world, the craziness of working with founders, how startups are so different from big enterprises when it comes to sales, and we will just wrap it up with some exciting stories. So, Rob, again, very excited. I'm so glad you're here. I know it was very hard to get your time. Why don't you go ahead and just say hello to the audience and let's get this going?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Neeraj. It's an honor and a privilege to be on some of your early episodes here of Better You. I've listened to the first few, and I think they're amazing. So don't forget about the little guys when you're the Joe Rogan of life improvement podcasts.
Love it.
So, but with your intro as well, that was very humbling. Thank you so much. I was excited to join here to share some stories, and I'm looking forward to it. Sounds like a good time.
Rob, let's take help us to understand. Look, as I said, you are my role model when it comes to sales. How did you get into sales?
Well, you're setting the bar high there because I've seen you in action, and you've been pretty incredible to work with. But um, I started early on. I was on the tech side. I went to college back in Colorado, and I studied computer science. And I was always a computer guy, and I just loved technology, and I just kind of immersed myself in anything that was technical. I used to take things apart just so I could put them back together. And then when I got my hands on my first Apple IIe, I started writing some really simple code that I just copied actually from the back of magazines. And I just loved to hit run and watch that actual program work after about 10 attempts usually. But I knew I wanted to get into something in technology. So I got a degree that was kind of mixed in business and computer science. And I started my career back when DSL was actually becoming a thing. And I worked for one of the first DSL wholesalers in the country that was selling their DSL last miles to the local ISPs. And I started in the network operations center, and I was doing a lot of technical stuff like configuring like DSLAMs, which are like these big boxes that sit in the co-locations and allow each individual customer to connect to the telephone system lines, and all kinds of things, working with customers. And I just got really passionate about it. And I was always, learning about the customers' issues and what their challenges were, and how DSL was opening up a whole new way of doing business. And so I took one of the sales guys at the company at the time. It was called Rhythms Net Connections. We were one of the smaller kind of startups at the time. Ultimately became one of the largest NASDAQ IPOs in history, although I didn't benefit much from that at all because I was just a lemming back in the day. But the company at the time had a few sales guys, and he took me out to lunch, and nobody had ever taken me out to lunch before. I was just paying my own way and starting, an, an entry level salary as a tech guy. And I was like, wow, this guy's being really nice to me. Why is he being so nice to me? And he said, you just helped me out. You upsold this customer to a class A block of IPs. They didn't really think they needed it, but they upgraded, and I actually made about 30 grand in commission off that.
Nice.
And I was like, are you kidding me? That was more than I was making in a year, my first year out of school that year. And I'm like, okay, so I helped you do this. Obviously I didn't even realize I helped. I was just helping out the customer. But that's when I realized you can combine your passions with solving, customer and company issues. And that's how I got the passion for it. So I was so naive at the time, and at that time our company grew to about 1,200 employees.
Wow.
After I'd been there for a year. Yeah, we went from 80 employees. I was sitting in the corner of a cube in this gigantic warehouse building, where we didn't have anyone in the cubes, to having that building full, and then we had 2 more buildings on the way, and so just growing like wildfire. And I was so fortunate to have that kind of experience early in my career. But I was so naive. I thought, okay, I want to get into sales. I didn't know what the proper protocols were within a company that size. So I sent an email directly to the CEO.
Yeah.
And I just circumvented all normal protocols. And I told her, Catherine was her name, and she was, a really prominent female CEO in the industry at the time, fastest growing tech company. And I said, I want to get into sales. And I gave her a couple bullet points why I wanted to. And she said, why don't you come by my office at lunchtime and give me your pitch? So I basically just told her the same story I told you, how these other customers I had helped out and the revenue I was bringing to the company. And she said, okay, Rob, we're going to give you a shot. So that's when I kind of, as they say, joined the dark side. I put my technical hat down and put on the sales hat, but I kind of really never let go of that technical hat. But yeah, that was fun. It was a fun run.
I love what you just said. And it's funny because when I moved from engineering to sales, every time the person I spoke with on the sales side, they always said, wow, what made you to come to the dark side? And I just never understood the meaning of the dark side. But when I started experiencing the pressure of crushing your quota, meeting your numbers, and then job security, then I understand, and also rejections from the prospects, then I understood the meaning of dark side. But there's a fun to it, right? That keeps your dopamine going, because that sugar rush of closing deals, winning together, it's just a whole different world in sales.
You're right, Niraj. I mean, it's as you know, there's a lot of aspects to it. Sometimes I think we put therapists in business a lot because there's so much stress and so many different dynamics to our job, and it's a challenge sometimes. But that's part of the game, and that's why we love it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned about the therapy, because I never believed in therapy but the moment I switched over to sales and I started crushing my numbers, there was this imposter syndrome kicked in, and I started talking about this imposter syndrome with my partner, and she's like, dude, I think you need to see a therapist. I said, no, I never seen therapist. But Rob, you're absolutely correct. There was a moment where I had 2 therapists, one executive coach, one shrink, and then another shrink, figuring out how to resolve this imposter syndrome feeling.
There's so many life lessons that can be learned in sales as well, and they go in parallel. So much life translates into sales and vice versa. So I think it's a unique opportunity to have it as a career.
Yeah. So okay. So let's move to the next segment of our episode. There are 2 worlds that we live in at the macro level, and one is the enterprise sales, big enterprise sales, where you have more established companies. You walk in, you get a rule book, you follow the rule book or playbook or run book, whatever you want to call it, and then you already have established market for this big company and you start selling their product or services. And then there's a second world, which is you are literally a first sales guy or second salesperson, and you need to come up with the ideas to crush your numbers. Now, I want to stay focused on these two topics because I want audience to understand that how crazy this life is when it comes to established company versus the startup. So, Rob, let's talk about how does it feel like working for a big company versus a startup?
Yeah, it's interesting, Neeraj. Like there's some common threads, but then there's some stark differences, as that you alluded to. And in my career, I've been in sales now for almost 30 years, 28 years or so. And I started my career, as I mentioned, that first position was with a smaller company, but just grew like incredibly fast. And then from there, I worked for some larger companies. I worked for companies like Mercury Interactive, which was a pretty big company in its own right, but we were purchased by HP, and that's one of the larger companies I've worked for, and a couple others in my career. And there's it's interesting because you feel like, I think it's important early in your career to have a little mix of those experiences, but they both are invaluable in what they teach. Like the larger companies I work for, you're standing on shoulders of giants, really. You get into an
Yeah.
organization, and especially if you're early in your career or you're new to sales, I think it's really important to learn from the best. And I had the fortune of working for some really great people that became my mentors. And you find those kind of people in these large companies. We'd always go to, all company events or sales kickoffs. And I've been with some companies where we have, this annual sales kickoff. For the folks that may not be familiar with that, it's pretty much like a summer camp for the whole sales and marketing team. And sometimes at big companies, you could have 500 to 1,000 people at these events. And I always noticed, I see like the rock stars that would go up on stage that I thought at the time, I want to be as successful as those guys. They crushed their numbers. They made some of these guys made mid seven figures early in the day when it was just crazy heyday of IT explosive growth. And it wasn't just the money though. It was like they had this certain charisma and actual like caring kind of persona about them. And that's kind of what I aspired to do. And if you translate that into how working for a big company is, you have so many resources at your fingertips with large companies. And in the past, large companies could kind of keep their layer of technology and sales processes and different operations in play for almost 5 to 10 years without changing them, because as the old saying goes, what ain't broke, don't fix it. And things were pretty static, back in those days. We dealt with very basic things. I mean, it wasn't basic at the time, but if you look back on it now, you could stick around for 5 years and not change and still survive. In today's day and age, in our agile world and the agile and very informed and automated customers that we serve, whether it be bigger or smaller companies, everything changes weekly. And that kind of translates into working for a smaller company. If you get a couple of those experiences, like I was lucky to have early in my career with large companies, learning from the best, kind of shadowing what they did and trying to model that, you can translate that into these startup companies. And you're right, as you mentioned, Niraj, you've got to wear every hat. Whereas with a big company, you've just got the sales hat on, and you've got the marketing team, you've got your pre-sales, you've got your engineering team, you've got your executives, you have customer success. With startups, you're all of those people. It's so. I think it's a fantastic experience. You and I were lucky enough to work with each other in a couple environments like that, and those are the places where you make memories and you make major bonds and experiences with people through the process.
Yeah, and you just mentioned all this quota crushers and top performers. Based on my own experience, what I have seen, again, this is just my personal experience, that sales in a bigger company can be really boring because you don't have the opportunity to implement your creative ideas to close deals, to come up with a sexy, solid sales pipeline, because there is always a boss who wants you to follow his or her steps or playbook or run book, and you don't get a chance to try something new. And that's just me. For me, that is really boring stuff. For me, startup early stage startups are fantastic to work for, because you can come up with so many cool ideas, cool ways to figure out the pipeline, close the deals, build relationship with your buyers, and also have fun. And so, Rob, in a nutshell, based on your 30 years of experience in sales, in a nutshell, let's say if you have to explain that why it can be, because look, the way I see you, Rob, you are also a startup expert, because you and I will work together in a startup, and I have seen you are still working for sort of startups, may not be early stage startups, but sort of startups, because I can't see you working for IBM, because the way you are, the way you are, your style, your way of thinking, coming up with your own strategies to build relationship with the buyers, I don't see you working for a big companies. Why is that, Rob?
Yeah, I think there's different, there's nothing wrong with either one. I think you have to figure out what suits and matches your personality, and how you operate as a person. Like, there are folks that like to be within those structured environments, and they do great at it. They have everything provided to them, and they work the system that's been in place for them. And there's definitely a need for that. And we wouldn't have the great products and large companies that exist in our industry today if it weren't for them. But on the other side, the startup mentality, it's kind of like, they say, so many people throughout my career said, you're the CEO of your territory. And when you're starting your go-to-market plan, which we can talk about later, you're moving into a new territory, what are you going to do for the first like 30, 60, 90 days and beyond? And you think you're the CEO and you're starting your own business. It's like basically starting a franchise. So if I was using my own money to start a franchise and I had my life savings and I was putting it all into a franchise that I either was going to sink or swim, I was going to be homeless or I was going to be successful. That's kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that I think goes into startups. And you kind of get the opportunity to not only benefit from somebody who had an amazing, unique idea and spark and grew that out to the point where they need you as a salesperson to help them evangelize that product, and also, interface with real company and customer challenges. But at the same time, you're also there because that's kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that I think is critical to exist in startups. So, a lot of folks have worked in both sides of things. I personally, at this stage of my career, it's the thrill of the game, as they call it. I love being influential and potentially being able to take that company to the next step and help contribute to that, for the greater good.
Yeah, man, I love I love the way you said, you are the CEO of your own little franchise, like your territory, your accounts, and you're just responsible for revenue. Go kill it, build a relationship, figure out a way to create a pipeline in in that territory or in those accounts. If I go back to just conclude, the challenges of the enterprise sales, especially when it comes to selling to the bigger companies, what I have noticed, you go in with the playbook, same a fixed pricing strategy, You're allowed to do only so much for the customer. Then you have to go through this red tape, the tons of processes to get approval for so many things. Like new feature, new enhancement, new discount, whatever it is. It just slows down the whole sales motion. And when it comes to salespeople, for us, of course, delivering the value to the customer is the most important. But the next thing is commission, right? We want to make money. And what I have experienced from my side, that for working for a big enterprise sales company or big enterprises, you your growth can slow down financially and also career wise, because you just have to go through so much red tape.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think those are the biggest challenges within the confines of an enterprise is that it's kind of the yin and yang. You have the benefits of all of the resources you could ever want at your fingertips, but the other side of that is those resources have been kind of set in stone in most cases, and you don't typically have the flexibility that you would within a startup environment. So having said that, your customers, typically you're going to be selling, especially in enterprise sales, to large, Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 customers. And they expect the same because on their side, they have very strict processes and a lot of gates you have to go through. Um, so it can be, you kind of get your blinders on and it can be somewhat restrictive. But, on the enterprise side, if you learn to play that game and you learn to be a bit more patient, and rely on the other resources within your org to contribute to the whole, you can be successful. But it can be challenging for sure. Working for a large enterprise has
Yeah,
its limitations.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so Ram, I don't know if you know, but a lot of folks who listen to my podcast, they are engineers, technical folks. We have a mixed audience. What I want to do for next 5-10 minutes, let's just talk about um, a framework. I have this book which I published called Founder-Led Sales. So what I did is I came up with this framework that how to increase your revenue by following 4 steps. So basically, you have your ICP. You start working towards your ICP. There are multiple steps to figure out your ICP. We will talk about ICP very soon. And then next thing is how you build your product messaging. Why I mentioned this in my book, that you can't screw up your product messaging. And then last 2 steps in the framework is your inbound strategy and your outbound strategy. So the whole idea here is that how to create a strong sales funnel by following this framework. So, um, Rob, what I want to talk to you about this, that when we have a product, let's say it's an early stage startup we are working for together, and this is the opportunity for us. Rob, you and I, we have worked on so many deals together, and there's so many stories to share. ICP, folks who do not know what ICP is, it is your ideal customer profile, and the product or service that you have. You basically go and identify who's the main buyer of that product and service. Rob, now I want to hear a little bit from your experience, because I love your strategies. I have seen you in action, the way you work on your prospecting strategies. Rob, could you enlighten us a little bit from your end, from your experience? How do you see the ICP piece coming into the startup world?
Yeah, I think that's a good tee up to a lot of moving parts there. You're thinking about go to market for startup,
Yeah,
and these are really the critical stages. I've seen startups. I've been fortunate enough to be part of ones where the spark is there and the spark ignites into a fire. And that's a huge step between the spark being a really great technical idea to the fire being applying that to real world challenges and finding the right people in the right amount of time that need that. Because obviously with startups, you have a limited runway. You could have a personal round of funding, or a seed round or series A through B or C, whatever it may be. That runway is, you can see the end of it. So you're in the plane and you started the engines and you're figuring out, okay, well, what direction are we going to go? And what's going to be our altitude and what kind of speed do we need before we take off? All those things apply to finding that ICP that you mentioned. And, when you and I worked together, that was a critical piece. And we found a really good niche in that market where, we found the folks that had critical challenges that we were solving. And I think for startups, that's the biggest challenge. And that's the most important thing is figure out, who your ideal customer is going to be. Is it, is it somebody that's, a really small agile company that's moving into, being a cloud first type company, and they need the latest and greatest to stay ahead of their legacy competition? Or is it the inverse? Are you selling to legacy companies that are now modernizing and they're retooling all of their processes and technology? And is that who you want to sell to?
Oh
Um,
my God.
you know,
I
and if yeah, go ahead.
No, I love what you're saying because but the reason I interrupted because that reminded the story. Like remember you and I we were working on a deal, and we were on the call, and I was your sales engineer, and the, I won't take the names, but customer said, "Hey, I noticed you guys are solving this particular problem in the security space, but you guys don't have so and so feature." And the way I slacked back to Rob, you know what? I think we can actually build this feature, and then, oh my God, Rob, again going back to the ICP, right? How it was so funny, and we generated literally more than $2 million out of the deal. Like how we created that ICP on the fly, and we built that feature for this particular customer. Rob, would love to hear the story from you, from your side of the world.
Oh man, that was one of the good ones. We built some good memories together, and yeah, that was that was interesting. We had one of the largest healthcare companies in the country that we had a tiger by the tail, if you will.
Yeah.
Here we are, a fairly small startup, and we had a great technology that solved about half of their problem, but it was like like 10% of what they were looking for was enough to kill the deal because we didn't have at the time what they needed. The 90% we had, but they could do that somewhere else. So, man, that was an interesting call. I remember that before I opened my mouth. I think I was trying to do right, and I was almost going to say we don't do that, but thankfully you were thinking ahead on that one, and you slacked me while we were chatting, and you're like, I think we can do this technically in the background. Let's put this on the side burner.
Yeah.
And in this particular situation, that probably wouldn't have been our ideal customer profile, but we were shooting for the stars. And long story short, you fast forward about a month and a half, and through a lot of innovation and scrappy work in a good way that you and the team did, we came up with a product that actually fit exactly what they were looking for and built it on the fly, not only in-house, but through a partner that you were very familiar with that hit a home run for us. We demoed it after building it for about 48 hours. We
Yeah.
demoed it. I was I was on the side of the road actually driving through the mountains at the time, and I'll never forget that demo that you and the partner did. I kind of teed it up. I parked the car on the side of the road watching mountain goats running across the side of the hill. And you had built that product with the partner,
I
and
love it.
it was exactly what they needed. So
Yeah.
that 10% functionality got us that whole deal. And yeah, you got to be agile.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, that's a good segue to the second step of the framework I was talking about. So ICP is number one. Second is a product messaging. And Rob, I mean, you worked with so many smart people, and and I'm also working with so many smart CEOs, founders, and so on. Man, if this is my experience, and do let me know if I'm wrong. Let's say you have an amazing product. Let's say you identified your ICP. But if you do not have a simplified version of your messaging of your product, you can screw up the sales cycle. You can screw up the whole sale, right?
Yeah.
So the second step is the product messaging. So, for example, the story that we just shared, or you were sharing, it was so easy for us to come up with a simplified version of the messaging of the new product that we built to address this pain point. So, Rob, I have noticed that a lot of technical founders, they struggle with the product messaging. Um, anything from your side that you would like to share with us? That what are the different things technical founders they can do to simplify their product messaging?
Yeah, I think that's super important. And you're spot on with that because I've seen so many companies that had great ideas just kind of saturate their messaging and water it down. And they did themselves a disservice because they had an amazing technology. But like I was talking about earlier, that runway ran out and they didn't have enough gas in the tank to get in the air and they just crashed at the end of the runway. And I think a large portion of that in a lot of cases was because the messaging was just too generic. And I think the way to look at it is, and I do this with customers as well. And the teams I work with, we try to think about our customers and you have to walk a mile in their shoes. Like what's the challenge? Where are they at in the market? What's their product? Who are their customers? And if you were them, what would be like the perfect solution to that? Like if you could just snap your fingers and you could solve that problem, what would it look like? And so you work backwards, I
Yeah.
think. And I think that's a really good way to find that pinpoint that messaging is there's nothing wrong with having a niche product. I mean, look at some of these startup products that were are in our market in IT and security, and they started out with a simple idea, and it was a very niche type of solution. All of a sudden, it just exploded into the industry can't live without it. Look at like identity and access management. Like back in the day, before SAML was even a thing, like people didn't understand that they were going to need to interconnect all these cloud apps, in a dynamic fashion, not only internally but with contractors and third party users. And like that was an idea where if they
Yeah.
marketed that as something else, like they called it like people security or HR security or whatever, there was no need for it. So I think that you're spot on in that messaging is a really important thing to nail down. And the way you can get that really nailed down is to do your research with who your customers are once you get that ICP and
Yeah.
how would you work that backwards if you were them and what would that look like?
Yeah, I love what Simon Sinek said. He has this book called Always Start with Why. And it's, I think, 15, 20-year-old TED talk he gave. It's a 19 minutes video, and he talked about this golden circle in the goal. And I use that all the time in my sales calls. And like, always start with why, and then go to how and what. And he highlighted in his TED talk that he has seen that literally every company, when it comes to messaging, they always start with how and what, like, what do they do, how they are so different, and they don't talk about why. Like, why are you selling this to me? What is the problem that you're solving for me? One of the best books for the audience, if they want to learn how to sell, one of the best book to read or listen to, always start with why. And if you don't have time to read the book, just go and watch the 19-minute video. It's on YouTube, and Simon talks about the golden circle. So Rob, actually, that brings to the last two things, which I really wanted to talk to you when it comes to the whole building the sales strategy, go to market strategy. You know, companies, they are spending so much money on the tofu. Folks who do not know what tofu is, top of the funnel. When somebody is sending you a blog, a webinar, a link to click, and that when you click that link, that link goes to their website. So they are collecting that information, and they can start messaging you more about their product or services. So, Rob, when it comes to inbound and outbound, from your over 30 years of experience, anything that you would like to share with the audience, that how can we be more effective and productive as part of the inbound and outbound strategies?
Yeah, I think it's interesting from what I've seen over the years. It's evolved quite a bit. There's a lot of organizations that will put a lot of weight in one basket, either one of those. And I think it's a fine balance today, especially if you're a startup and you're a founder of a company and you're thinking about, okay, let's say I had $1 million for this year to invest in marketing and or customer or prospect acquisition, building the pipeline, as you put it. I think
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's kind of the chicken before the egg scenario because to get some, get messaging and get top of the funnel leads, you actually have to have some kind of credibility and you have to show examples and case studies of customers where you've solved similar problems. Consumers are so smart these days and they're moving so fast, they just don't have time to take a chance on somebody that's brand new. So I think, it's important to initially establish a really good outbound campaign or outbound processes. And that's where you yourself can control who you're targeting and who you're sending that messaging to. And then you can kind of seed the top of it, and start to kind of cultivate some of those leads that are coming in and those folks that are coming to you. But if you look at the
Yeah.
statistics, like from what I've seen over the last couple decades, your success ratio and your percentages are so much higher on outbound activities. Outbound activities in my world include not only like direct marketing or messaging from me personally to, executive buyers in organizations or directors or VPs or even project managers, but it's also, through your partners and you invest time in your partners that do outbound activities for you. And, that it's a whole game there and it's a whole, we could do a whole podcast just on that. Um, but I think,
Yeah, maybe we should,
yeah,
sorry, before I lose this thought, maybe we should do it because, Rob, now AI comes
yeah,
into the picture and AI generated messages and videos and so on. I think that's a whole different podcast that how sales productivity can be enhanced using AI without sounding like a marketing email
yeah,
or a
absolutely.
robot,
Yeah, it's
right?
changing so fast, and
Yeah.
I'm starting to immerse myself in it just because, of course, we want to stay on top of the game and make sure that we're doing the best for the companies we work for, but we're also getting the most targeted messages to, our prospects and let them figure out if we're the right fit initially. And yeah, AI is just hugely enhancing both sides. So, uh, but back to your
Yeah.
point, for top of the funnel, that is you have to have, top of the funnel uh inputs at a certain point. And I think the critical thing is back to if you had $1 million to invest, you know, the inside resources and the outbound resources I think are critical just to get that initial messaging across to the right people. And then from there you can kind of cut your teeth there and learn what are their challenges and, get some of those new accounts in where they're willing to kind of have some of those growth pains with you. And then you can spend some of the rest of that budget on bringing in I kind of call it herding cats because a bunch of them, they're going to be going all over the place and your percentages are going to be much lower top of the funnel. But at the end of the day, you're going to get a great kind of balance between the two once you get it running right.
I love it. Again, I'm so glad that we were able to talk about enterprise sales, startup sales, overall the framework for the sales. And Rob, again, be safe. I know the storm is hitting Florida, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Better You. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into today's topic and found some valuable insights to help you on your growth journey. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to leave us a review and share Better You with your friends. Together, let's continue exploring the exciting world of tech and business. Until next time, stay curious, stay innovative, and keep growing.